right. Greetings, my unruly friends. Is my mic on? Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning. I'm Sage Cole. It is July 28th, 10 a.m., our second lecture of the day. And Guard set me up very well, set us all up very well, I think, now to hone in on one point in the story, that is the story of our lives, the story of our regeneration. And as we go along, I think I had 2 points I wanted to make that kind of situate us in connection to what Guard shared. I also studied with George and got to learn from him this developmental model. I read the book of Keegan's book about human development, and I've always found that incredibly compelling. There definitely is a corollary in that journey. And I wouldn't say that all human beings necessarily make that journey just by growing old. I don't know, perhaps you agree with me, that it's not just a natural process necessarily. It can be. Martha is sharing. She can see that playing out. I wonder sometimes if the new church descends fully in the world, maybe it will be a natural process, and maybe we will, follow these stages in that succession. But I think there's another way to think about it, which is that the story does begin there is a moment when that spiritual journey can begin, and it is a choice and it is experience that does start with the call of Abram. And I chose to cover Abraham and Sarah. I picked this topic very quickly when I heard that we would be going through the promises of God, because on a very heart-gut level, I feel very connected to that story, and it really resonates with this moment for me in my life. And I'm 48 years old. I'm not a child. And perhaps we can understand that when we hear, Jesus telling us that the spiritual journey is about becoming like a child. And I think over the course of our lives, as our spiritual journey kicks up, we can revisit these earlier stages in a deeper way that can have a resonance with that childlike experience. So that's what I want to explore with us this morning. I wanted to speak about God's promise to Abram and Sarai, who in the course of the promise's fulfillment become Abraham and Sarah, because for me, this is my story right now. And as we heard from Guard, and George Dole put it, this book is a book about us. And I want, not everybody got to answer the question where they find themselves in the story, but this is definitely where I find myself in the story. And so I hope to share that with you a bit over the next 20, 30 minutes, and invite you to consider if this maybe has been a part of your story in the past. Maybe you're here with me right now. Maybe this is what's coming up for you. Who knows? But the essence of the story of the call of Abram and Sarai, of this first covenant, is a call to leave home. It's a call to leave the familiar, right? The comfortable, the well-worn. And I wonder if any of you have experienced such a moment. When you have gotten this nudge that it's time to go, to step away from something that is known and into something that is unknown, with a sense, a strong or subtle sense that if you're able to do it, if you're able to actually leave this familiar state of being, that something better is promised, something blessed or abundant. I wonder if, and we're not going to have time for personal sharing right now, but has anyone had that experience in any way? Feel free to just kind of raise your hand. Yeah. It's pretty essential to the human journey. And I know we've already read it 2 times. Let's read it a 3rd time. 3 is a holy number. So let's read those first few passages from Genesis chapter 12 and see where this kind of lands in you, and maybe the memories you have of this state, where this maybe is showing up in your life right now. Let's see how this passage is really very particular about you and or perhaps about communities that you're a part of. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in all the families of the earth, in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So it makes sense that there were a lot of hands. I'm glad there were a lot of hands, because in my mind, this is the first step in the journey of the spiritual life of our human experience. The path of regeneration, the path to the holy city, to the new church. We've got to first start here and be willing to leave our home, to be willing to leave what Swedenborg describes as kind of our primary initial selfish orientation towards life. If we're going to step into a higher life, if we're going to step into a heavenly life, we have to leave. We don't have a choice. And I think it's really what's crystallized for me in that necessity of leaving home is it's really an egalitarian way of understanding our human journey, because the truth is we all have to leave no matter how nice our home is. Even if we have the most nurturing, wise, loving parents on the planet, the best community, telling all the best truths, even if we're born into a new church, we have it all figured out, why would we ever have to leave? And yet, when we're born into a context, that context becomes who we understand ourselves to be, right? And so even if we're born into a community with great values and ideals, there's still a way in which we are receiving our identity from the outside, instead of really knowing yet what our identity is on the inside, which is given to us by the divine. And so there's this necessity to leave, to be called away from that given identity. And it's a very, my husband and I are both clergy, so why would they ever have to leave? We have all the truth here, and yet, of course, our children will probably be like the most against church of anybody around. And that's just how it goes, it's just it's sort of what is inherent in this journey, because we have to make our way to find out, to move beyond that selfish orientation. Because again, even the most upright community is shaping a person to have a sense of, well, this is who I am and I'm not that, or those are my enemy and this is what's good. And by leaving home, by being called away from home, this is what welcomes us into the journey of regeneration and growth. Because as we leave home, who do we encounter but people who live differently, people who live by different rules and different ideas of the good, different ideas of what is upstanding. And just like a rock in a tumbler, all of our hard edges, all of our particularities, we rub up against other people. And in that process of rubbing up and bumping up against other people, we start to see that, well, I like the identity that my parents gave me, or I don't like the identity, whatever, however we feel about it, we start to become aware of it. And we really can't become aware of it until we can step outside of it. As we step outside of it, we can start to have a new view upon ourselves, where we can see the selfish orientation that we are born in. That's just inevitable. It's not a bad thing. We haven't failed or done anything wrong. This is how it works. We start out with that sense of who we are in a limited sense, And if we're going to make our way to the holy city and have that more unlimited sense, we have to leave the familiar. And we could go deeply into what that whole journey of bumping up against other people is like. This is not just about leaving a physical identity. It's not just about my parents were farmers and now I'm going to go try another job and that is one dimension of the change, but it's also leaving a psychological identity, right, and a spiritual identity, and beginning to have some perspective on that. And the book group you are all going to be engaging in this week is kind of all about gaining that wider perspective, all of the different parts of ourselves that can come into being and that we can become aware of. And my sense is that whole process doesn't really get started until we are called away. So there's lots I think that's evolved in our species over the last few hundred years to grow in that awareness as more and more humans have gone on this journey and become more deeply aware of themselves in the process. It would be cool if George was still here so he could be in conversation with us about IFS and everything that's evolving. But that's not where we're going to go today. We're going to stick to the Bible. This is a biblical lecture. And I want to just go through this story of Abram and Sarah and really kind of, and I hope you all have kind of brought into your mind or your heart where this story fits with you, whether it's a particular experience that you've had, a time in your life, or maybe this moment right now, to consider kind of the ups and downs of the story and how it might relate to your experience. And then I also put up here on the board another way to kind of put this story into context, which is one of the, I think Swedenborg gives us so many fabulous ways of understanding history and the Bible, and this journey of the stages of church that have existed on the planet, I always find very compelling and really important to think about if we're really interested in this new church, which I think we're pretty interested. That's why we're here. So to know about this, it's helpful to know, where we're coming from. And it really helps to ground the story of Abram. Because as Gard shared, the first 11 chapters of Scripture are kind of a prologue of the story of our journeying back into the celestial. And so it's the story of how we got out of the celestial and then how we are going to return. We start with Adam and that kind of just deep connection, that ideal Garden of Eden. Everything is just smooth and sweet. Then the second succession of churches starts with Noah, where it's also still really connected. And we had an interesting conversation during our opening weekend program that some Swedenborgians have the idea that this church still kind of exists on the planet in some forms, like within shamanism and nature traditions that have this just in-ground, in-bed sense of the correspondences and live in the world in that way. But then, of course, this spiritual era of community that the way it's told in the story of Noah really was worldwide. Everybody had this knowing until the Tower of Babel, when everyone could communicate, and yet there were some problems with that. If everybody was on the same page and humans began to kind of dabble in selfishness, it became problematic. And then the call of Abram is what begins this natural church, this embodied religion, sacrifices, ritual, the commandments, all the things that will come into being. And we put it low, and sometimes we go, oh, that was bad. Couldn't we have skipped that? But you can't skip that. We're natural. We're embodied beings. We have to start. We have to do the thing. We have to actually leave home. We can't just think about it or imagine it, or we have to actually go on this journey. And so much of the scriptures is about the journey of Abraham and Moses, leading us back to a spiritual state of being with the emergence of Christ in the world, and then ultimately this renewed celestial experience. And I think this would be another thing I'd love to talk to George about. Gard mentions him saying, well, we get there after we die. We get there once we go to heaven. And heaven is here. And time doesn't really work necessarily in a linear fashion. And we're supposed to embrace a bit of heaven on this plane before we cross over. So I do feel like I don't really want to be a part of a Swedenborgian community that's just like, oh, by and by, that's when we'll have the new church. After we die, then we'll get it. That really our charge is to start to embody and live that celestial experience here on this planet. But to get to that celestial experience here on this planet, we can't just start by, meditating on the holy city. That's helpful to know where we're headed, but we have to start where we are and where our home is. So that's one way to just put into context this moment in the journey, that it's really important. And I think the way that Gard shared George's insights, you see that, right? We hear the fulfillment of the call of Abram is the holy city. Like, these two moments are deeply connected. Swedenborg also points out that the call of Abram, it corresponds to our individual lives, it corresponds to the evolution of life on this planet, and that it also corresponds to the life of the Lord, the life of Christ and his glorification. And that it really is about the time in the Bible that we don't really hear much about, the time before he enters his public ministry, when he's becoming the Lord, when he's wrestling and making his own choice to leave home and to follow God, to be God, to embody fully his divinity. He talks about, Swedenborg uses the term, this is the intermediate phase of the Lord's life, this moment of the call of Abram. So that we've read it 3 times, the call of Abram, and one of the things that I think is really important to know, what we're going to do next is go through the 3 times that God speaks directly to Abram during this process of his call being made manifest. So we've heard the first conversation. We've heard it 3 times, and if you notice in it, it's pretty simple. It's just like, go and you will be blessed. Go and you will be a blessing. And if you raised your hand and you have gone through a threshold like this, I think this is often how the threshold begins. I don't think we can handle too many details when we first get the call to change. We don't immediately hear from God, okay, you're going to go, and this is what it's going to look like, and this is how it's all going to play out, and these are the obstacles you're going to have to face. Like, if we had all that information when God first nudges us, we probably would, not ever go anywhere. We would be stuck in our overthinking. And this has certainly been my experience. The reason I so resonate with this is, and I think a lot of you know this, a few years ago I had a profound spiritual experience where I really was just like, this new church business is a big deal. And this new church is going to be different than anything we've ever experienced before. And it really just was this total shift in like, well, I wonder what it could be. It could be anything. And a sort of a detachment from the idea that I knew what it was. And I look back at myself then, and I was just full of hope and possibility. And perhaps some of you saw the little video I recorded when I declared my new church jubilee, and I was just like, everybody's going to be into this. This is such a great idea. There was a naivety, which I think is also where it does resonate that this is a childlike stage. This is God says go, and you go, and you don't overthink it, and you don't ask everybody's opinion. You just do it. And I think this is often how that first calling occurs, and it's a blessing that it occurs that way, because we can only handle, if I knew everything that was going to happen when I made that choice, I very well may not have made it. It was a simple, this is what's next, it will be a blessing, go. And I think there's a lot to be gained from understanding that. Now, of course, that's not the whole story. And we do know that the story of Abram and Sarai continues. So after this first call, after they make the choice, they leave, the first thing that happens is there's a famine. And they have to go to Egypt for food, which is a recurring theme in the scripture. So they've said yes, they've followed the call, they've gone, and now they're hungry. Because what happens when we leave something familiar where you know where all the food is and you know how to get your needs met and you know what it looks like, you've got to figure that all out again. And so it's not so surprising that there would be a famine, that there would be a feeling of lack. And it is not so surprising that they would have to make their way to Egypt, which, as we know from Swedenborg's insights, corresponds to learning, experience. Once we've said yes and we've headed off on the journey, it doesn't just manifest immediately. Now there's so much to learn about who we are, what might be true. This is where the bumping up against other people and new things starts to happen. So the famine happens. As we know, Abraham goes off with his nephew Lot, and there's quarreling among their herdsmen, and there's a separation that occurs between Abraham and Lot. And Lot, and then when that separation occurs, they each choose a different plot of land. And Lot chooses the valley, the fertile valley. Smart, right? That's where things grow. It's a reasonable choice. It's a practical choice. And yet, on a spiritual level, it's the choosing of the sensual. It's the choosing of the earthly. And this whole journey that Abraham's on is really about choosing and trusting something that is beyond the earthly. And so that's a kind of a story of how we go on this journey. And one of the first things that starts to happen is parts of us, we've just left home. We're starving. There's a part of us that's going to just want food right away. And I think of how I was immediately like, I'll work at the post office, or I'll do this, immediately trying to grasp for what would meet my physical needs, as I stepped into this unknown. And that's such a temptation when we're venturing off into a new space. So all of that starts to happen when we leave. And then God speaks to Abram again. And the second time that Abram and God speak, there's a lot more meat to it. And the conversation is described not as just God saying, go, but now it's a vision. The Lord came to Abram in a vision. So there's a little more ownership in Abram, that he is having an experience where God is showing up, which is a little different, I think, than just hearing a booming voice. There's a little more meat to it, a little more color. There's also more anxiety. There's a conversation. This is all in Genesis 15. Now God comes and says, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward will be very great." But Abram says, "Oh, Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless." He starts to express his anxieties to the Lord. And they have this conversation where the Lord reassures Abram, "I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to give you this land." And then what occurs is there's a sacrifice where the Lord then kind of gives Abram something physical to do, which I feel like if you've ever gone through a transition where you've gone into an unknown, it's so nice to have a task that gives you some focus. Okay, I don't know where I'm headed, but I will do this. And he offers these sacrifices to the Lord. Swedenborg he offers them all, and they all the Lord calls him to cut them all in two. And Swedenborg says this cutting in two is about each one now represents the Lord and the church, which is kind of the Lord is the one doing the calling and the going, and the church is that place where we're receiving. It's the median point, right, between the natural world and the spiritual world. So there's it's almost like you go off on your journey, you're uncertain what's happening, and then you go to a counselor or somebody. I almost feel like in this sacrifice, Abraham he's doing something physical that is then giving him some insight into his path. And right after that, fun of all funs, as the sun's going down, a deep sleep falls upon Abram, and a deep and terrifying darkness descends upon him. It always happens. So here he is, making his way, and there's that image of the dark night of the soul, which again is so, Swedenborg would use the term vastation, this, what the hell have I done? What the heck am I doing? Where am I going? And this facing of the darkness, this facing of all that's involved in building something new or trying something new is, I also think, is unavoidable. We have to feel all of those feelings. If it was easy to go, everybody would do it and it would just be smooth, but there's a pain in it. It's a deep, terrifying darkness, and the Lord now tells Abram, know this for certain, that your offspring shall be aliens in a land that is not theirs, and shall be slaves there, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for yourself, you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. And they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. That's kind of a bummer. That's kind of the thing that if he'd said that during the first call, maybe Abram would have wondered, I don't know, that seems like the best plan. I don't want my ancestors to be oppressed for 400 years. But like Chuck reminded us in his sermon and in our conversations, and in God's time, what's 400 years? In the scope of eternity, these phases of oppression and struggle, they all have a use. And now that Abram's already left, he's already made some progress, he's already faced some battles, now he can start to hear more of the depth of his call and how hard it's going to be. And luckily, God does say, well, you'll get to live a long life and be buried in peace. So perhaps that was a little bit of comfort for him. You do your part, follow me, continue to go, and you will be okay. But there's going to be a lot that's going to befall you and your ancestors. Another useful way to think about this too is, again, as I mentioned before, this story of Abram and Sarah also represents the journey that the Lord goes through as he becomes and is glorified to become the fullness of God. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about what Jesus had to kind of wrestle with, knowing the suffering that would be a part of his journey, knowing what salvation would require. And it's we're talking about God's promises this week, and it's great. Promises are awesome, and thank goodness for them, and they often require so much sacrifice, and that's such a big part of the story. So Abram hears all of this. He carries on. He says, okay, I guess I really am going to have a child. But then the next thing that unfolds is all of the drama between Sarah and Hagar and the birth of Ishmael. So he's been promised again, this whole thing started because he was going to have many descendants. He still hasn't had a child. His wife is still unable to be pregnant. She doesn't believe it's going to happen. And so all of these dealings go on because of Sarah's motivation for her husband to have an heir. And we might think about that part of the doing something new as where you're headed, you trust in the message, but your emotions, your affections, which the women in Scripture often represent, they're not so sure. And I don't know, as a manager type, I totally relate to Sarah. Like, she's trying to figure this out, she wants to make it happen. Because she's just, and I think if you've gone and tried something new, if you've made this break, those experiences of doubt are just inevitable. It's not always it's rarely a smooth journey of, I've been told to go, I will trust, and it will all be fine. And then after the drama between Sarah and Hagar, we get the third conversation between God and Abram. Now Abram is 99 years old, and the Lord appears before him. And Abram's, this time the covenant gets really serious, because now we get the covenant of circumcision. So something that started out as just go and it'll be a blessing, then it was sort of more of a I really am with you, Abram. It's going to be okay. Yeah, do these sacrifices, but I promise you there will be a child. Now the third time he says, yeah, and you're going to have to get circumcised and all the people with you. I'm not a man, but I imagine if that was the first thing out of the gate, he might have been, nah, I'm not so into it. But this, think about the inner meaning of circumcision, or even just the physicality of it. It's a mark of a community. And what's happened here is Abram has lost his community. Abram and Sarah have left their community. They've left the bounds of who was their people. And so it makes a certain degree of sense that as they're making their way out, as they're following this call, they need a new community. We're not called to leave our home to never have another home, right? We're called to get to Canaan. We're called to the holy city. We need community. We need to have those around us who we recognize and who we trust. And the mark of circumcision is also, it's a mark that recognizes our sensual nature, and that there's a shift occurring. That yes, we still are procreating and we're still human and we're doing all of those things, but we're doing this now for a higher purpose, for God, for an abundant future that we know not yet. And the covenant of circumcision happens, and that's also when Abram and Sarai are renamed with their new names. So now they really are, they have made some progress, and it's I don't know, for me it's like heartening and also disheartening that as they make progress, it gets harder. It's not like you make progress and then it gets easier. It actually, you gain more resources to be able to withstand the challenges ahead. It gets harder, but it also gets holier in a sense. The call becomes a little clearer and more specific, the actions that are necessary, and they're given these new names. So there's sort of a process of regeneration already occurring in these two people as they become the beings, the people who can fulfill this larger mission. And it's after they receive these new names that finally they are able to have their child. And after this kind of conversation that occurs between God and Abram, we also have that great scene where God appears with the three men that come to Abram and Sarah's tent. And that's that great story where we've heard the message, they're going to have kids for a long time, but now they're with Sarah and Abram in the flesh. And Sarah is invited to cook food for them. So there's this wonderful experience of communion where the message is heard once again, and Sarah laughs, which is just such a lovely, another moment of, what? Is this really going to happen? I don't believe this. But almost with a little bit of a humor and acceptance of the journey. And I do think as we go along the path of change, leaving home, regeneration, the more we're willing to say yes, to the journey and to the what God is asking of us, God kind of can get closer, and we can have these experiences of consolation where we are close where we get the message kind of directly and personally. And if you've experienced a change in your life, I imagine like one of the best things that can happen along that harrowing journey is when other humans recognize the change that's happened in you. Or when other humans say, I see how you're changing, or I see what you're doing, and I honor you. Like I often feel like those are moments like Abraham with Sarah and the three men that are representative of God. There's that human connection can be so important. Because this is not an individual journey. This is about all of us, and we are serving and supporting each other along the way. Of course, it doesn't end there, because then there's Sodom and Gomorrah happens, and even after Isaac is born, the first thing that happens is God tests him, and he almost kills his son. So, anyway, I'm going to end it soon, but I just want to share that. I think it's really necessary to hold the spiritual path is like the best one. It's the holiest one. It's always the one I'm going to choose. I think it's always the one that we want to choose because it is leading us to this holy city. It is leading us to this heaven on earth. And just as holy and beautiful as it is harrowing and painful. And my suspicion is that's why not everybody takes God up on the offer, because many of us would rather settle in the valley and have a fertile land and have enough to eat and just sort of get by with the enjoyments and pleasures of the material world. It's very satisfying. If you've seen the movie The Matrix, the one guy said, I would just want to go back in the Matrix and I just want steak and potatoes and pleasure. There's a part of us that really wants that. It's in all of us. And yet this invitation of the spiritual life is about coming to recognize and hear that there is something way bigger, way more expansive, way more beautiful than the pleasures of the flesh. And when we start to really see ourselves as eternal beings, we can see that, because we can see this life is going to go by in a flash, Just storing up our treasures here and having a little pleasure here, it could be fun for a minute, but as we all know, it's going to be over and pretty quickly too. So is that the best place to put our attention? And then lastly, before we open it up for conversation and questions, if we're headed to the new church, which is I'm pretty sure our charge as a community, can we all kind of recognize that we can't skip the Abraham stage? We can't skip the leaving home and the uncertainty and the discomfort of that. And I think as a church, this is also what I'm trying to often communicate, because we call ourselves the new church, and that's awesome. I'm so glad to be a part of it. And it's not about a static reality where we have all the information and so we've got it and we're fine. It's a moving reality. It's a changing reality that requires a leaving of home. And that's really tricky when you're the new church, because that's where you want to go. So why would you ever leave? And all of this tension exists within our community. And while that's tension and maybe feels scary and uncertain, we also have this incredible promise that this new church is coming, that it's coming soon, and we have details and information about it. And so I hope that can give us confidence, kind of like the confidence that Abram had to leave home, to know that this reality is being promised and there's a reason to make these sacrifices. And that we might begin to wonder, how God is calling each of us to leave the familiar and create something new, create a new manifestation of life in the world that could be that container. And it certainly feels like at this point in our history, so many people worry if our planet has a future, right? We don't, with what we know now, we don't see the way ahead. But if we can trust that there's more to be revealed and that this is really the direction we're going, I believe that can give us the confidence and the willingness to go on that harrowing journey of leaving home, with its pitfalls, with its challenges, because it was really hard for Abram, right? It was super hard. There was a lot of ups and downs, and it worked. He was the father of the life that he was the father of the life that will emerge in the holy city. And there are so many people on this planet that have a link to his life and his journey. And so what ways of leaving home and stepping into new things that we might do in our lifetime might also create links to future generations who can step into this holy reality. So that's my offering for today, and I'm happy to take questions and comments.
I left the microphone on that front chair where I found it. I don't know where it is if you want the microphone.
Would you mind managing the questions?
Well, if there's, I said, when I came in,
it's right there. Oh, it was missing. Oh, I see.
I left it on the chair where I found it.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't see it when I came back in. So
it reappeared. Thank you, David. Thank you.
I had asked and you shall receive.
There you go. There you go. Perfect. I think we have one in the back. Don't mind.
Okay. Thank you. I have to respond about this leaving home, because I remember the church in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia church in the 1990s decided to pick up from this beautiful church in the city and, like pilgrims, go out into the country, into Westchester, just to land, and built it all. And these were not young people. These were all beautiful, beautiful people that it just reminded me that they really just said, yeah, we're going to keep this going, but we can't. We're going to do it somewhere else.
We're going to do it
It was
differently.
amazing.
Very cool. Katie?
I want to just throw in a little, this is Katie, I want to throw in a little good word for I was a little confused by your words, because to me the new church is the present. It's not a future thing. And the past, if you think about it, you know, I'm not a Swedenborgian literalist, but if you kind of go to that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Well, I think I agree. I mean, it's definitely, the only thing that ever happens is in the present. There isn't actually a future. It's all present here and now. And like we're discussing these covenants and as stages of evolution or stages of the journey, we can step in to the new church anytime we want. We can embody it, but we also can be closed to it if we're not willing to kind of open ourselves up. Yeah. Denise?
Hi, Denise here. I was just thinking as you were talking that most of my leavings of home, have not been hearing the Lord's call. Oh, I hear a distant call, come. It's more like, yike, an oil spill in my basement. I've got to get out of here now. Or we need to move because, or this is a really terrible situation. Whatever it is, generally they're not the soft, gentle call of God. It's more jet propelled out of my present situation and into a new, and it is a new spiritual territory, but often it's accompanied with a perilous physical or material change.
You could say that was also true for Abram. I mean, the way
certainly,
Swedenborg describes it, a new church was needed. His community had become idolaters. To stay home was not allowing him to live his best life, and he had to go.
Yes.
So there's probably always a development of being pushed. That was certainly part of my experience. It was, if everything had been smooth and simple, I probably wouldn't have heard the message to go. It's
Yes.
probably true.
And I wonder in the writing down of it, is the voice clearer in the recording than it was at the moment?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the Lord. Aha.
Yeah.
Maybe that's in hindsight sometimes.
Yes,
And certainly in our own lives.
Yeah.
The hindsight is much more clear than the present call of the Lord.
Yeah.
Typically. Every once in a while there's a clear.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know that I've
Still
ever heard
small
a booming voice. I agree.
Thank you. Thank you, Sage. Thank you for your comment there, Denise. Just a reflection on that. There, of course, it's true. What we know here is, we did this because we had to do it. Something happened in the physical world of obligation, time, space, relationships, things change. So that happens in the world. Now, the way I understand that is that what happens in our inner lives at a certain level, below the level of the experience of the tactile real world, which is emotional, it's knowledge about, I got to do this. That's a level of interior life that is not the one that we're talking about. The level of interior development of which Swedenborg writes does not correlate one-to-one with events in the physical world. They're different. It's another order, and that's correspondence. So and what Denise said is actually quite correct, is when we grow spiritually, and of course Sage was talking about this, we have time to reflect, and that's God's voice is simply a metaphor for interior knowledge that comes from the divine. It's a real place in a real psyche. And of course, regeneration is to open the levels of the mind so that we can respond to that. But anyway, that was reflection is on the oil spill in the, oh yeah, that actually triggered something in me at another level of a different kind.
Yeah.
I did just want to observe one thing too that you've implied, and maybe just to make it a bit stronger, is that in the Lot separation, Swedenborg gives us a great gift by saying that that was not going to serve the regeneration process in a direct way. That would interfere with it. If Lot stayed with Abram and Sarah, this nephew would have caused all kinds of problems. They had conflicts with their herds, in the story. So they said, you got to go. So Lot separated, but that was only the part of the senses and the physical feeling side of life that would have interfered, and our attitude toward those. So but Abram actually stayed with his sense. The senses keeps going in the story, the physical part of him. So we get to keep the physical pleasures as long as they serve the inner life.
Right, and there's times they have to be separate.
And so you were very good to bring that up, and I simply underscore it.
Thank you. Martha, did you have something, or?
Yes, I was going to take it to Martha now.
No, what? Never mind. Okay.
Oh,
All right.
no.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, and isn't that true? We wouldn't, if we only were concerned with the sensual, we wouldn't ever want any discomfort ever, right? So we need to have that a little bit, we need to separate from us for a bit if we're going to take a risk. Yeah.
Just
Anything
add a little something to what was said before about it seems clear when we look back that, that God was calling us. And hopefully that will help us to hear God's call clear the next time and recognize it.
Sure, yeah, maybe that's part of why the message gets more detailed over time. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Back at 11.